You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Welborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
Hey, Power Athlete Nation. I have another rad podcast in store for you today with my boy D-Mac, Derin McMains. Now, this one was a little interesting in that he was not only a former professional baseball player, but he's also the director of mental health performance at a global cybersecurity company, which I found fascinating. But really his true passion is working with baseball players and working with different organizations to improve performance through mental impact and clarity, and just this idea of like creating resilience and toughness through mental training. And we dive in on not only what he does, but some of the things that I've encountered, and just a very flowing, good conversation. I know I'm not a talker. You guys probably laugh. Hopefully I gave him enough, but it was funny. At one point we kind of switched around and he started interviewing me and I was interviewing him. Excellent podcast, and somebody that I'm excited to pull into our ecosystem and into our genealogy. I was hoping he had a book to push because I wanted to read more, but he has it in his head and hasn't pushed it out. But I don't know how active he is on social or whatnot, but he has a podcast. So hopefully we'll get another chance to talk to him and bring him on, have him here in person. But, having D-Mac on would be epic. So strap in, buckle up, Derin McMains.
So I played professional baseball for a while in the Giants organization, San Francisco Giants. Moved into coaching and managing after injuries. I had 5 surgeries. So anyway, wasn't very good at the end of it, so as it goes. And so they asked me to coach.
Well, pro sports never ends well. No. For like there's very few people that get like what I call the Tony Gonzalez, where you get to play 17 years and step off, and the next year you're like Gronk on the sound. On Tony, Terry, and Tommy, and you're fucking have a multi-million-dollar job on the sports deck, and you're dating an SI supermodel. Yeah, I'm like, now that only happens to like Tom Brady, Gronk, Tony Gonzalez, and like a few people. Most people end up at the end of pro sports fucking battered and broken, and they're like, I can't do it anymore.
Yeah, so that's definitely my story. Yeah, no, that's very true. They asked me to coach. So I coached and managed for a bit, 5 years to be exact, and then it was during that time went back to school, got my master's in sports psych because it was one of those things where. So this was like 2010, 2012. So it's like still sports psychology. It was like, hey man, you're jacked up if you're going to talk to that person, So I avoided people like myself, like the plague, I'm like, I ain't talking to that person, and,
well, it's because you're a spy. You're going to be reporting on all the,
100%. Yeah.
And then management's going to fucked up.
Yeah. God damn head it. Case, so,
we got to get rid of them.
Yeah, totally. So anyway, went back to school though. And I started to see it from like a proactive approach, right? Cause I think, as a professional athlete, as it's like, you're really selfish. All you're focused on is yourself and how do you, get the most out of your ability and, all that kind of stuff. And then when you start coaching and managing, you're like, oh shoot, man, they got, 26 different guys and they're all looking at things differently. And, and you start to go, man, how can I be a better coach? And so that's where it kind of started. And then to start to look at it like, man, this is actually a proactive approach to this. There's not a, wait till you get all broken and you're trying to figure out what's wrong with you type thing. And so that's where I just kind of shifted how I did things. And then from there, started the Giants' first mental performance programs. I did that fall of 2012. From there, fortunate enough to be there when it's kind of that run where we had a bunch of good players, a bunch of good leaders, and I was just part of it, and won the 3 world championships there in those 5 years. Then Notre Dame came along, and it was one of those things where destination school, a lot of older coaches are there. And so they had kind of that old mentality on the mentality that essentially I had, where it's like, you're jacked up if you're talking to those people. So, Jack Swarbrick was the AD at the time, still the AD actually, for a few more months. Ultimately wanted somebody to come in to coach the coaches around mental performance, around a proactive approach, right? Because they had a sports psychologist, but they were on campus, Notre Dame. It's like no online stuff. So, so that whole deal. So I went there and more or less coached the coaches. So I just worked with kind of the 26 different teams there. Did that for a bit, really just a year though, missed baseball. Cause I was like, man, this kind of, I wasn't smart enough to realize.
Which is weird because nobody misses baseball. I'm just kidding, making jokes.
It's in your blood. You know what I mean?
And no, dude, to be a baseball player, you got to really love it because it's a lot of games. I mean, I played football. I mean, it was 6 months and then I got to go chill for 6 months. I mean, baseball players, even in the off season, are like, going to the field,
Yeah.
go fuck around for 3 hours. It's truly something in your blood.
Yeah. It's a weird thing. Cause definitely, we're not efficient. I can tell you, like, we'll hang out there for hours,
That's why I don't train baseball guys. And I worked with some baseball guys, and the joke I make is baseball's organized grab ass. And they show
wrong.
up, and it was unreal. I mean, like, I was like, dude, you got, like, we're going to train. This is the fucking completely, like, time management. Just like, I'll be there. I'll do it when I'm doing, it's, yeah, no, I think it's like lack of sense of urgency because there's like 162 games or something.
Yeah.
So it's like, maybe I get a hit, maybe I don't. I'm going to get one on Tuesday. I'll be fine.
For sure. Yeah.
Like it's definitely the long game.
For sure. Yeah. No, that's funny you say that. Organized grab ass. That's good. So, but yeah, missed baseball, went back and then, worked with the Mariners for a couple of years after that, and then Giants. And then after the COVID year, decided, hey man, I want to start my own consulting stuff. I'm a couple kids now, they're 16 and 10 now. So it's like, I need to not travel as much. 2 years prior to me leaving professional sports full-time, I started working as a executive coach with the founder and CEO of ReliQuest, which is a cybersecurity company based out of Tampa. So started working with him. And then when I left, started my own consulting, I wasn't smart enough to realize, like, hey man, like, you should probably have, 401k, health insurance, kind of need all that kind of stuff if you got a family. So he was like, hey, you want to join us full time and do for our whole company what you've just done for me, individually? I was like, yeah, I don't know what it looks like. He's like,
do I get a 401k? Do I get health insurance?
My full time, but I'll tell you what, though, give him a ton of credit. Cause I was like, hey man, like, I love sport. Like, I'm not going to give up sport. And he said, hey, perfect. Use that as your R&D. It's your, and so that's why I consult now with the Arizona Diamondbacks, because it's here in my hometown. And this will be my 4th season consulting with them. But yeah, so full time with the ReliQuest, I've been rolling out that mental performance program there now since 2021. And it's been fun, man. It's been a rocket ship since I've been there. I think I joined around like 500 employees. We're like 1,200 now. Like, ARR went from 80 million to we're over 300 something million now, I think, and we're still.
And you're directly responsible for that.
Zero. Again, what you want to do is jump on when there's really good people around. It's kind of like the Giants, it's like, oh, Buster Posey, Bumgarner, I'm going to jump on this guy.
Be like, it was the mental performance work that we did that allowed them to hit jacks. No, I'm just fucking kidding. But no, I mean,
it's true. I mean,
it's such a fascinating field. Like, because I don't know if you saw me laugh a little bit, but when you said you went to Notre Dame and there was this old kind of coaching staff, I mean, when you talk about mental performance, I think most of the world doesn't know what that means.
Yep.
And a bunch of 60, 70-year-old football coaches who were probably raised on something where it's like water is weak and, toughness happens when you get kicked in the balls 25 times with splinters in your hands. Yeah. And it's like, and like not realizing like how do you effectively create, resiliency? And like, I think mental toughness is like very 1950s. There was probably like a book in the 50s where like, you gotta be mentally tough.
Yeah.
But everybody's tough at certain points, and a lot of times people aren't tough. But the ability to be resilient over time. And I also hate the term resiliency just because the military has globbed onto it and literally curb stomped it like a dead horse. So you can't even use that word anymore. So I'm always constantly like searching for a term that hasn't been beat to death by either the media, the army, or other sports organizations.
Sure. That's funny you say that. I wish I had one, but everything comes full circle, man. Maybe we're back to mental toughness. I don't know. But the one thing I do say about mental toughness is like, because I'll go in and talk to coaches, they're like, we want to be mentally tougher. We want to teach them how to compete. And my first thing is always like, well, you can't develop what you can't define. So let's just define that first. And so, so that's where we always start. Say that again. I
mean, can they define mental toughness? Like that's a really interesting piece. It's kind of like a pretty girl, right? For example,
True.
I'll just use that because I like pretty girls. Who doesn't? Or pretty women, let's say. Let's be a little more PC
Fair.
in 2024. But you like a good-looking person walks in the room. Everybody generally is like, for the most part, you're like, wow, that person's better looking than everybody else in here. It's easy to ascertain.
Yeah.
Just like a front engine V12 Ferrari. I'm not a Ferrari guy, but a front engine V12 Ferrari, V12 pulls up and you hear it and you're like, oh shit, that sounds different. But mental toughness is one of those things that's harder to define, but when it happens, and more important, you see somebody in the throes of it, it's easy to obsess.
Yeah.
We interrupt this episode with a shameless self-promotion. Are you struggling to balance life and training? Let me introduce you to Grindstone. Punch the clock in the face with our most flexible training program designed to fit around external stresses. Perfect for the boardroom warriors, parents, students, and athletes looking to train while life has your axe to the grindstone. Claim a 7-day free trial by heading to powerathletehq.com/grindstone today. Now, back to the show.
Yeah. So I can tell you, like, the definition that we've kind of settled on over the years, this is just working with several different coaches, is you have the discipline to focus on your process when your career depends on your results, right? And so what it does is, like, now, can you coach to that? I think you can when you start talking about, like, what are the psychological skills you need to separate from your results, right? Because it's like, you got to live in this space, you know this, of like the urgency of results that matter versus the things you focus on that are helpful, right? There's a difference between what matters and what's helpful. And sometimes we just put them all together and go, I gotta, I have to win today, right? And it's like, it's like living in the space between willing to fail but refusing to fail. Like, you got to kind of live in that space of like, and people that compete, people that coach know it, but I think the more words you can put around it, the more people can then begin to create their own framework for how they're going to operate within that, right? And then to compete, for me, I like to compete better because I think mental toughness definitely is more subjective. I like how you described it, like, describing, a woman that walks in and you're like, oh, wow, she's hot. And somebody else will be like, really? You got that? Or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think
you're like, no, that is exactly my flavor right there.
Yeah.
Like, I know exactly what that looks like. And that the same thing happens with mental toughness. And actually, I was on a call. There's Tim Kennedy and Matt Boudreau started this thing called the Apogee School here in Austin. And then they have a bunch of satellite locations. And so they have a men's group for the fathers to ask me to speak on. And as they were kind of like talking about, not only resilience and, all these other key factors, I found it kind of hard to like define some of these things. Like, would people define me as mentally tough? Yeah, I don't really like to give up in the face of adversity.
Yeah.
And I was always more shocked and amazed when people I was with who I thought were up to like, ready to go, all of a sudden like fail in the face of things, like, yeah, I'll just give you, like, I don't know. I mean, like, and it's not necessarily like, let's say in a sporting environment, it's in like weird ways, like, hey, there's work to be done. It's cold outside, like the temperatures were stopped to drop from like 70 to like -18 here in like 3 hours because Texas has the craziest weather on the planet.
Yeah.
And so like my daughter's like, Dad, she has a horse. And she's like, Dad, can we bring the horse down in this? We don't really have like a place for him. Like, we'll go build a shelter. So went to the Home Depot, grabbed DJ, works for me. Dude, it's like the weather's like dropping like 10 degrees with every gust. We're out there with like no gloves setting this thing up. And like, most people would have been like, it's too cold. I'm like, well, there's a job to finish. Right. I don't care if it's a -18 degrees or 70 degrees. Like, the work has to be done. And I'll be cold later on, like that ability to persevere when the wind's blowing on you.
For sure.
Which is, the same thing playing in the NFL where, you played in the hottest game in NFL history and one of the coldest games wearing the exact same outfit.
That's cool.
Like, no change.
Yeah.
And like, people ask me, how'd you do it? And you're like, well, I really had no other choice. It was what was required of me. And I don't like to lose. So like, in the age old, a man with a choice is a man with a problem. I just like to be, this is what I got to do. This is what's required of me. Now just go out and hopefully do it better than the next guy.
Yeah. Well, you touched on an important point of mental toughness, I think. And one is clear purpose, right? It's like, horse needs a shelter. I don't like to lose, right? And so it's like, those are two things. And then the second piece for me, mental toughness, is it's context specific, right? And I heard this story a long time ago, and it's actually a military person. It was a paratrooper, like a medic paratrooper that comes in and, flies into particular areas. And he goes in and, if somebody's been shot or whatever, and he's there to help the individual, get him back on a, helicopter, get him out of damage, right? And so as he's talking about, he's like, bolts are flying everywhere. He's like, I have no problem operating in that space because I'm prepared. I know what I'm doing. I don't even think about the bullets flying. I know how I can save this individual. He said, but if I have to return a punt in an NFL game, no way. Like, I want no part of it. And he said, because I'm not prepared to do that. I don't know what it takes to do that. And so I wouldn't even choose to go into that space. Whereas I'm sure there's several punt returners that probably wouldn't want to, parachute into the middle of a war and help save a guy. And so he started talking about the importance of context and mental toughness, and how like there is a competence and a preparation and a purpose factor that goes into it that I thought was really interesting, because it's not about like you're either mentally tough or you're not. It's like, what environments are you mentally tough in? Where do you want to be mentally tough in? And then let's build in the the purpose, the preparation, the competence and all that kind of stuff.
This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market. We've built an online training business by partnering with Train Heroic to deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Hammer, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training. And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best training tech in the business, head to trainheroic.com/powerathletehq. And now back to the show. So I've never really thought about mental toughness being contextual. I just kind of figured it was like gas in the car. You either have it or you don't, the car's going or it's not. So I never really thought much about context, but now that you say it, it makes sense. You probably have mental toughness in the places where you have aptitude and you can apply it.
Yeah.
And like what I was saying was like on that call, one of the guys brought up David Goggins and, his ability to run and do this. And I was like, I don't really have any, desire to go out and run 200 miles.
Right.
So like, I look at it like, is it cool? Yeah. I mean, are the words that he's speaking, are they impactful to people? 100%. Do I look at it and think, I don't know, like there's sound bites, but people really resonate. And that stuff like has like, forced, kick people in the pants to where they've lost 200 or 300 pounds. And like these like amazing stories you hear about like how he's inspiring people by running. And I'm like, I like to sprint, I like to train, but like going out and just running on running, like that to me is not something that's like extremely impressive. But whereas, Cameron Haynes, for example, dude runs so he can chase down an elk after he shoots it. I think that's really cool because I want to eat those elk steaks, and I'm glad that he's doing it because I want to eat the elk steaks.
Sure.
So it's really fascinating that it's so contextual in some way because you just kind of figured that like, oh, that dude's tough. He's going to be tough in everything. But maybe he's tough in his phrase when he's positioned with something that's outside of his skill set or her skill set.
Yeah, I would think so, right? I mean, how many episodes have you hosted here? I'm just curious.
What
741.
741. We're closing in on 750 episodes of Power Athlete Radio. We started in 2013.
Wow.
No, was it? Yeah, 2013 was what it was. So last year was our 10th year.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is year 11.
And I'm sure it's felt like a grind at times. You're like, yeah, we got to do this again. You tell me, I don't know.
So this is so weird to admit. I have disgusting amount of mental resilience for redundant things. Like I am so happy to keep, like I go lift weights and I have a building and I go train and like people are like, don't you get tired of it? And I'm like, no. For the same reason, I'm just as excited to eat a steak today as I was yesterday and 10 years ago. I still get excited by like the most basic things. And so when we originally started Power Athlete Radio, I kind of hated it. And I didn't necessarily, I'm like, people aren't going to just listen to something, because this was pre-video and,
sure,
it was like everybody was just doing these verbal podcasts. I'm like, do people really want to listen to this stuff? And as we got into it, it allowed me to have a sounding board with intelligent people like yourself, where I could have, these like nuanced discussions, for a purpose. I mean, if we weren't doing the podcast, I would never have met you. It's not like I'm calling you on the phone
right
to have, like this conversation. But now that we have this genealogy, and I'll send you my number after this and we'll be friends. And if I ever run into something or all of a sudden I'm presented with something where you fit in, I'm like, oh dude, I talked to this guy on the podcast who does mental resilience and he says this, he'd be perfect in this space. And the way to like increase your genealogy
sure.
by finding like-minded people, I have built a collection of super friends that I refer in my Rolodexes to like the X-Men of the world, where regardless of what the problem, what the outcome, what the question or whatever it is, I have that person with 1 degree of separation to answer that question. I don't care. Like you can throw anything you want, any question at me. Like I have the person to call from doing this podcast and having, playing in the NFL. So I have really cool reach in that way,
sure.
and I have cool friends, but it's pretty amazing for just the people that we've had, like this organic conversation. And like when I go back and look and I'm like, dude, like I would never have met half of these people And on top of it, how impactful they've become because of the podcast. Like reaching, we had Angela Duckworth on for her book Grit. I had not read Grit. They sent us the book. I read it and I was like, damn, this is, amazing. Just some of the people that we've had on have just really created this amazing kind of, I just call it like a genealogy, like the touch, like here I am and I got all these little satellites and you never know who's going to listen, who's going to be inspired by it. I got a DM from a current NFL player that reached out about maybe potentially coming to train because he had dinged in, listened to the podcast and was like, oh man, I want to go learn more. And, that's just like putting good information and like good thoughts and vibe and, being a, transparent, hopefully honest, good person, providing good content and not being full of shit.
Yeah.
Because I think in this world, so many people are fucking full of shit and there's so many frauds and hucksters and this whole, so when you come across people that are doing good work, it tends to, radiate and good things tend to happen. So, yes, in the beginning, it kind of sucked until I realized the value of having nuanced conversations and then putting them out to the world and seeing who's attracted to what and more importantly, what they can glean from it.
Yeah. I love that, man, because it's like, one, I appreciate your honesty, but two, you discovered the value of it once you got in the middle of it, right? And I think sometimes people wait. They're like, well, is this going to be I got to feel it before I really go all into it, And then, it kind of speaks to like behavioral activation, right? Where it's like, don't wait for a feeling, do the thing. The feeling will follow later, right? And so I think that's one of the biggest separators that I've seen, I'm sure you've seen in professional sports, is like the highest performers in the world act different than how they feel. Plain and simple. And then the feeling catches up to them. They're like, oh, I like that. I'm going to keep doing that thing because I like the way that feels on the backside of it. Right. And so, I mean, you call it delayed gratification, call it whatever you want. But the idea to, let your commitments and your curiosity drive your behavior over like whether I feel like it or not, And so I've seen along the way that's been a consistent trait that has showed up, whether in business, sport, athletes, coaches, wherever it might be, where, it's just like, curiosity and commitments kind of get me where I need to go.
We had a good friend of mine on the podcast years ago, a guy named Andy Stumpf. He's since been on Joe Rogan and, I knew Andy kind of before all that. And Andy made a really interesting statement to me I think about probably way too often. The difference between a man and a boy. Man does what he has to, a boy does what he wants to. So when I run into people all the time that say, I don't feel like doing that. And I always pause and I kind of take mental stock and think, I never even think about how I feel about doing stuff. It's more whether it needs to be done or not. And so I have a quote on my phone from Marcus Aurelius, which is, let me see, can't really see it, but it says, ask yourself at every moment, is this necessary? And I have it on my phone for a very good reason, because as you click into maybe, dead scroll or whatever, social media, you plug in and screw around, whatever it looks like. I think in that, is this necessary? And if it's not, I don't log into the phone. If I have to check Discord or emails or whatever, like, is that necessary? Yeah, at this point between these hours, this is where it fits. But with the training, whatever it looks like, whether like, building a shelter or doing this and this, is it necessary? It is, because there's a core set of values that I've established ahead of time that need to be supported at every point, whether it be physical, mental, emotional, I live on a pretty good sized ranch. So I have one of my tenets, like one of my pillars is leave everything better than what you found it. So now improving upon the land, grading it, changing it, doing everything to make it a better version of what I got. For the same thing, I build and fabricate and restore trucks and cars, and do that as a hobby and weld. And I'm in this constant. And through this process, I realized that the difference for me is I'm a process-driven person. I'm not a results-driven person. So like building the vehicle, because I had a buddy swing by and we just finished something and he's like, dude, what are you going to do with this? I'm like, I don't know. I was more into the building of it.
Yeah.
Now that it's done, I don't know what to do with it. I'm sure we'll just launch it off of a cliff or something. But I think people are constantly thinking about like, oh, when I hit this and this, and I'm like, the adventures on the road, like there's this process that doesn't stop. And when I've run into people that are results driven, where it's this and this and this, it becomes very transactional.
Yeah.
And, I work with some professional Brazilian jiu-jitsu players. One of the guys is one of the top dudes in the world. And, after one of his, he fights, he lost by like 2 points. This guy had a little bullshit sweep, didn't submit him. The guy wins 2 points and wins. And it was actually for like the world title. And he was pretty sad after it. Rightly so. He lost out on money and he fucking lost to this piece of shit.
Sure.
So he's like, what do we do? And I'm like, what do you mean, what do we do? It doesn't stop the train. We're like, this is part of the process. Winning and losing is what we do. It doesn't change anything. You know what we're going to do? We're going to get up tomorrow and we're going to go exactly back and we're going to continue to work. It's not like we're going to throw anything out. We know what we need to do. We just have to do it consistently better with more pressure and more time with unrelenting fucking just, passion to move forward. And I'm like, dude, it's not stopping. We'll continue to train. It's not like I'm leaving. Like, oh, he didn't win, I'm fucking out. I'm like, fuck, dude, let's go.
Yeah.
And it's like, winning and losing and what you do, especially in the NFL, like I lose a game or win a game, I still have to go and watch film. I still have to go to practice. And we got another one next week. And the more I worry about that one, the less I'm going to do in this one. And then we get done and the season's over and they say, hey, go home. You know what I do? I start preparing for the next season. So I've lived my entire life through this process. So I don't really understand the results. And I'm like, what's the result? Death? Like, do I get to the end and I die? And I'm like, okay, that's the end of the game. Like, I didn't stop playing. So it's just an interesting, I'm sure you've seen this within the mental toughness where people are so transactional and it's so like outcome focused. And you're like, focus on the process of greatness and you'll get there faster than trying to hit these different little pieces.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's well said. And that's baseball, right? I mean, you talk about football. I mean, that's baseball where it's like outcome every night doesn't matter because tomorrow's coming. You got to get up. You're going to be there at noon the next day. You're training, you're getting your body ready, and I think that's one of the biggest things that a professional baseball player has to learn is the reason why people cheer for you, the reason why people, quote unquote, I mean, maybe this is a story you tell yourself. This is the story I told myself. The reason that, people cheer for you, love you, want to talk to you, want to high five you, want your autograph is because you're good at baseball, right? I mean, if you weren't good, people don't clap. Pretty simple. And so you get to professional baseball and, good looks a lot different. Like my biggest struggle was, you're in high school, you're hitting 400, 500 every year, winning a state championship because you're one of the better players on the team. You go to college, you're doing kind of the same thing, hitting, 350, 400. You get into professional baseball, average player hits around 250. Well, shoot, my whole idea of 250 is like, no, if you hit 250, you're not very good. Well, now it's like, so you almost have to reorient yourself. And if all you are is focused on the results, which I think we all have to go through this maturation, right? Of like changing our mindset on like what greatness really is. And it is the everyday process. It is getting in the thing every day. But up until that point, it's always been results, right? Because it felt good because you were better than everyone else. So of course, what process? How about I just beat everyone? That's cool, And then you get into that space where you're playing with the best in the world and things change. And so you're like, shoot, how can I show up every day? Because that's the thing. How can I show up every day? And despite what happened yesterday, put my best foot forward, still look for ways to improve, take the coaching, take the critical feedback. Again, be willing to fail, but refusing to fail at the same time. Be willing to fail, meaning like, I'm going to try this thing. I think this should work today, and then just like go for it. I don't care who's watching. Like, I think this is going to work. And then do it all over again the next day. And then do that year in, year out, day after day. And that's just been the normal rhythm of my life. Like I joined professional baseball at 21 years old. I'm 44 now. I've been in it every step of the way. The only time I wasn't was the 1 year I was at Notre Dame, which was, 26 different teams of chaos where nothing ever ended, And so,
Sure.
Yeah. And so like, I'm just like you, just wired, like I don't think about failing at all. In fact, I was just talking with a group the other day. They're like, how do you get people to be willing to fail? They're talking about that. And I said, well, first you got to change your relationship with failure. Let's talk about that. Like, how do you process it? And they're like, oh, I don't know, ever thought about that. And I said, well, let me give you two kind of schools of thought and see where you land. So there's the Giannis Antetokounmpo interview last year when he, famously said and went viral where it's like, hey, there is no failure. There's just steps to success the whole way. There's just steps to success. Yeah. Great interview that he was talking about that. Then on the other side, there's Derek Jeter. Derek Jeter, 20 years with the Yanks, 5 world championships. He says all the time, every year we did not win a World Series. It was a failure. So which is it? Is it there is no failure and there's steps to success? Or it's like, yeah, there's failure. And my point is, doesn't matter either. What matters is what you do the next day. So I don't care if you call it steps to success. I really don't care if you call it failure. What matters to me are the behaviors that you choose to do the following day on how are you going to get better and what are you committed to that day. So it's like, let's just get past this like whole labeling this and that. And let's just get into the process as you described of just like getting better every day. Did you succeed? Cool. Go do the thing today. Did you fail? Sorry. Go do the thing today. Right. It always kind of goes back to the do the thing today and let's get better and move forward.
Well, people also so focused on, like, I'll just give you an example. Guys came in, they were super beat up from all the training they were doing. I had a full, I don't really train people. Let's put that out. We do a lot of online stuff. I mean, we thousands of people via this. I take on a few special cases a year where people are like just very unique in a lot of ways. And I'm like, man, this is something unique that I can use to effectively drive power athletes. So train these pro BJJ guys. I had the opportunity to bring world champions into the gym and test a lot of the training that we had been doing on a sport that I wasn't familiar with. And so after I started training them, I started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and now I have a blue belt, and I go roll with these guys. And they're absolute savages. Like when I mean that in a good way. We had a UK guy that I used the word savage, and he was very upset about it because I guess that's a negative, or maybe he was from Africa. I can't remember. But these are top dudes, and I show up and I roll with them, and they're all 6'4", 250, and I do their training, so I know exactly how strong they are. And you get out, and they're extremely talented and very skilled. And I have my skill set, which is, I used to smash people for 10 years, and I've absorbed a little bit of their stuff. But I also have an internal processing of movement that, like, I just don't, as a professional athlete, this, like, I'm sure you swing a bat and you knew based upon the ball how you swung that bat, or you watched it and you're like, man, I know where my foot was at. Like, I could make micro decisions based on what they happened just within my own body. So as I'm rolling, I know exactly where that guy put his foot was because of this and this and this. And I know all these things, and I can see these outcomes happening, and I still can't stop them. So as we were, going in to do this stuff, it's, sorry, I went off a little deviation, but I don't really train people in this way. And then my other one is a very rich older guy who hit me up, and he was like, I need to put on muscle. Can you help me? And I was like, sure, 100%. Like, and it's dope that I get to talk to this guy. So on these different special cases, but what's been really fascinating to work with these, like really high performers and people at that high ideal, you start trying to like dial into like, okay, what has made this person unique? And what I've come to the conclusion is a level of flexibility where this isn't working, I'll try something else. And they're in this constant, like, malleable, they're not rigid. And what I've run into people that are failure is they're so rigid that they can't adjust to their failure. I almost look at failure like if I'm sailing a boat, or, like I'm in a bumper car and I'm trying to drive and something hits me from the side, and I redirect and I redirect and I redirect, and I'm malleable to where I can kind of take these little bumps to continue to drive. All of a sudden, if you're so rigid holding this, when it hits you, it drives you off and you can't do it. So it's like failure is just like little bumps that keep you driving straight down the road. And as long as you take these little bumps and realize, like, the little bumps are part of the, like you said, the maturation, really the learning process.
Yeah.
And as long as I'm not holding the wheel so tight that thing drives me out and wrecks my car, because that's what happens. I'm sure you run into people, one bad game, and all of a sudden they're like ready to throw in the towel and quit, and they can't process it.
Yeah.
And you're like, dude, is this the first time you've ever lost? And they're like, yes. And you're like, oh shit, I've been losing since I was 6 years old.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Like I never, and I grew up with two brothers, older brothers, and like, they never let me win at anything. My brother and I had like a 30-year-long ping pong game. Every time we'd see a ping pong table we play, I didn't win for like 29 years. And we still went and played. And it's like, anywhere we go, like, there's a ping pong table, you want to play? Fucking 30 years. I'm like, today's the day. Today is my day to win. And my brother's like, you're either stupid or mental resilience to think that you're going to beat me today, and I ended up beating him. And I was like, screw you. Like, it's, but like, I'm always so fascinated, especially with kids, where they get, or even I've run into this too, like, defeated, like, oh, and even on other things, like I got fired from his job, or I got divorced, or this. I mean, my whole life is over. And it's like, dude, I mean, these are terrible things to happen. I'm sorry they did.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that this is the end, that like, game over, cash out, put another quarter in. Let's figure out what you made mistakes on, and not continue to make the same fucking mistakes over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you speak to a really important thing that I try to share with a lot of people around us, the importance of identity. Right. And so this is kind of like my framework, my mental model for how I work with athletes or business executives. I'll just work backwards. Let's deconstruct it. Right. So it's like, hey, let's do it. Actions, performance, behaviors, whatever we want to talk about. That's the thing. That's the output. Right. So why did I do that thing? Why did I perform that way? Why did I do that action? Well, I can tell you, you probably did that because you felt like it. Right. It's our emotions that influence our actions. We'll talk more about separating from emotions. We've already talked about that a little bit,
yeah.
But most people, it's our emotions that influence our actions. Well, then the next thought is like, well, why was I feeling that certain way? Why did I have that emotion, anger, whatever it might be? Well, it's because of our thoughts, right? So it's our thoughts that determine our emotions influence our actions. Next piece is like, well, why was I thinking that way? Why was I having those particular thoughts? Why was I holding on to those things? Well, that goes to our perspective, right? So how I see the world determines how I think about it. How I see the situation, how I see this game, how I interpret this loss, whatever it might be, determines how I think about it. How I think about it determines how I feel. How I feel influences ultimately what I do next, right? Well, the last piece is like, well, why the heck do I see the situation that way, right? Why is my perspective? Well, that goes to our identity. And that's the whole thing, is how I see myself is how I see the world, right? And then how I see the world determines how I think about it. It kind of goes through that whole step, right? And so the identity piece is huge, right? And for me, there's kind of three things that go in that, and that's beliefs, core values. You mentioned your core values earlier, and then self-image, right? Kind of three areas. And so beliefs, those are those deep-rooted, deep-seated things. Research tells us we get these things by the time we're about 8 years old, based on our community we're living in, what we're watching, what we're read to, you know, kind of all those type of things. Those are those deep-rooted, deep-seated things. Core values, these things that we choose. We kind of get in high school, college, our brain starts to more fully develop. We start seeing like, oh, I like the way that looks, or I like that person, or hey, something maybe that was impactful to you. And all of a sudden you start to choose these core values, things that are going to start to guide you. These are more conscious, right? Like these are the things that are going to guide me going forward. But the thing that makes mindset so stinking tricky is the self-image piece, because the self-image piece, this is context specific. So example I'll share is like, I've been in professional sports 24 years, right? Professional baseball locker rooms. I can have a conversation with the general manager. General manager calls me and say, hey, let's talk about this team. How can we make this team better? Let's go. Let's have that conversation. I don't worry about it. I had a ton of experience. Feel like I can carry a good conversation. I kind of know where we need to get to. But if like I have a leak in my sink here at my house, I can just tell you, like, you're probably more of a handyman than I am. Like if there's a leak in my sink, I like start to like, oh shoot, it's like, is this a load bearing wall? Like we got black mold. Like where's this whole, like I just start like, kind of freak out about it. It has nothing to do with my beliefs or core values, all about self-image, how I see myself and my ability to make sure my house is working, right? And so it's like, so because I don't see myself as someone that can probably handle that, and it's going to be 3 trips to Home Depot, 8 hours of YouTube video, like it's going to be that. Now my perspective kind of start freaking out, my thoughts start going crazy, and I kind of get, anxious around it. So anyway, so I go back to like identity, right? And it's like, what do you believe, core values, right? And self-image, like how do you see yourself showing up? And there are ways that we can intentionally craft those things, right? A lot of times that's why trust is so important in a coaching relationship, because the best improvements you're ever going to make with someone is when you start talking about core values, right? And you start talking about really how you see yourself and how you want to see yourself going forward. And then the second piece is around perspective. So the best work I ever do, I can tell you, is when we're talking perspective and identity. That's the best work I ever do. If we're in the emotional management strategy phase, which is, again, very helpful, right? Learn about some deep breathing techniques, learn how to slow your heart rate, right? Kind of those things. Those are important. But if you're always going to that because every moment feels so big, well, shoot, let's talk about why that moment feels so big for you, right? Because now we're getting into some reframing stuff, where there's thought management strategies. Hey, self-talk, is self-talk important? Absolutely, right? But if we just stop there, and you're always trying to talk yourself into it, well, there's probably something deeper going on. So let's back that up, right? So anyway, I share that. And like, that's kind of my mental model. So when, someone goes through a divorce or maybe a tough loss, we start to unpack like, why does that bother you so much? And I can tell you, I had a conversation with someone the other day, and it was a tough conversation. We finally got there though, but it was like, they were struggling in work, struggling at home. Come to find out, well, their entire identity was based on who they were married to and the work they were doing. Well, guess what? When you base everything on those two things and your marriage is not good and your performance at work's not good, your perspective, your thoughts, that's why you're a mess, right? And so it's like, and again, life's freaking hard, like we all go through this. And so now it's like, hey, well, let's unpack. And now let's figure out what are some things that you can control? What are things that you want to really put your identity in? And it's been it's excruciatingly hard for someone to go through that. I had to go through that too, right? But it's like, once you start to get clarity on who you are and what you want to be about, it starts to make decisions that you make every day. You can make them with more purpose. You operate with more clarity. You feel better about what you're doing. You're more in control of your life, right? You're controlling your 3-foot world. You're not letting the world control you, all those types of things. So anyway, so when you mentioned that, that's what I started to think about, was like just the importance of the identity piece and how that impacts us going forward.
Dude. Man, that is so impactful. Like all I could think about, and it was actually on this call the other day, one of the questions the guys asked me was, how did you reframe your identity once you were no longer a professional football player? And football was really interesting. I mean, it's really the only thing I enjoyed doing in this world. I mean, I got paid a lot of money to lift weights, train, and just basically go fuck people up for 3 hours on the field in cool game unis and travel and do it and basically beat up the toughest dude in the world for 3 hours in front of millions of people.
Pretty cool.
I loved the violence. Like I love the process and the violence. And all of a sudden one day you get hurt, you can't do it anymore. I had surgery. The surgeon was way too aggressive, too much bleeding and swelling. Had to get a second surgery to clean up what the first surgeon did. Missed a whole year and then some. And then that was in year 10. I missed it year 11. And I thought, man, I'm not like, what am I going to do, Mark, and come back in year 11? Like I just kind of missed the window by selecting the wrong surgeon.
Wow.
And, it was hard because this is what I did. I mean, this is what my identity, and I felt I had a lot of good football left in me. And somebody makes a decision kind of for you in a lot of ways. And we were joking that, very few people get to be the Jeter and these guys and ride off into the sunset with next thing you know, you're rock and roll. But that piece of like, how did you redefine your identity when your identity was so wrapped up in this? And I was like, I know why like depression and drugs, and I know why, a lot of guys kill themselves in this, because this is all they had done and this was their entire world and no longer just that world. And it's not like you can kind of do that world. You either do it or you don't, or your periphery, right? And being a coach, does that scratch the itch? For some guys it does, and for a lot of guys it doesn't. I mean, I know it doesn't, because a lot of guys love to be the man in the arena. Like I'm standing on the field, the sun is on my face, and I get a chance to do what I love to do in front of these people. The coach is standing on the sideline coaching people to do it. It's this like arm's length transaction, which is fine for some people. Like I had my time, now I'm going to mentor other people, and that's like a completely change in the mindset. And then a lot of the coaches get egos, and next thing you know, you're, Bill Belichick or, Vrabel or these guys where it's like, it's all me. And you're like, oh God, you're fucking coaching. There has to be this kind of change in the mindset and kind of a pivot. And those guys asked me about it. And I was like, it was something I loved to do, in the day that I couldn't do it anymore, I wasn't willing to do it at a lesser level than with the highest one I competed in, and even like now I think back, I'm like, I could have been a good locker room guy and hung around and worked with the young guys, but I would have fucking hated it.
Yeah.
And the line from Good Will Hunting where he's like, at least I won't be unoriginal. Whereas like, you don't want to be a fraud. You want to do it, remember how good you were, and then clap the book and go and do something else. And I was very fortunate to do something else very quickly and just kind of like launched into it with the same kind of aptitude at which I had done everything else. And for me, the transition wasn't all that difficult, but it was hard to leave behind something that you really love to do. But and you just kind of make peace with it, and you find other ways to be it. And you realize like, just because I was successful there doesn't mean I can't be successful in other places. I really believe within this lifetime, we get a chance to live many lifetimes. Like this is like multiple iterations of myself. So now I need to like create a new iteration, and who's this next person? And, the constant state of growth. Like I love to, learn skills and attain skills, and like I'm constantly in this evolution of learning, especially like learning to work with my hands and creating things and like pushing these things in boundaries, whether it be, like the podcast room, which we built. I mean, these other, like a million other things, but there always has to be something where you're like, you know what, I'm going to push myself outside the comfort zone to continue to get better. And then, the minute that I feel stagnant or I feel stuck, that's where you're like, you feel like this creeping little, not like depression, but gloom come under you. And you're like, I need to go outside and go do something or fix something or build something or create something new, just for the fact that I need a new project or I need something to focus on, because without it, we just sit around and, woe is me, and box boy kicked the can.
Yeah.
And so I think for professional athletes, and, I've spoken to it a little bit, but I'd love to hear your take on like that transitional piece that, you said, I just thought it was hilarious. You got done playing. You were like, this fucking 1 year I was away from baseball, because it's really what you love and it's what your identity needs.
Yeah.
And it's not like, hey, like and I don't get to swing the bat, but I get a chance to work with these players, and it's allowed you to build this version of yourself that you're happy with. And I feel like for the players that don't find that, it's a bad thing. Yeah. And I don't know how to mentor players on the other side of that to find this. Because I've had a lot of guys hit me up, hey, I just got done. Like, what should I do now? And I'm like, because very few guys get that phone call. Hey, we need you on the sports decks. NFL Football Channel wants you to buy a bunch of suits and show up and talk about sports. I mean, fuck, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like a dream job. But how many guys get that? Very, very few.
Right.
And the guys that do, I'm so stoked they have them. But, and you still get to kind of live that pro athlete lifestyle where I'm talking about it. I get to wear cool suits. I'm kind of a celebrity. I get to go to games. So they get to live on the periphery in a different place. But it's still not the real world because that shit can end real quick too.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. You mentioned a couple things there that I definitely want to highlight. I can tell you when I first started coaching, when the Giants asked me to coach, I was not prepared. I just went in at the end of spring training. I said, hey, I can't do this anymore. Not very good. I was a switch hitter. I tried to play my last year just batting right-handed just because of the shoulder surgeries I had. Well, for anyone that's ever played baseball, when you go from switch hitting to just batting one side, just be prepared to get your stuff shoved in, and so it was like, wasn't great. So I was like, all right, this ain't going to work. So told them, hey, done. And they said, well, we want you to coach. And I said, well, that sounds terrible. I don't want to do that. So I went home and told my wife, hey, I'm retired today. I'm not doing this anymore. She said, well, we have an 8-month-old, kind of goes back to I'm not the smartest guy, going to need some health insurance. She's like, what are you going to do for a job? I said, well, they asked me to coach. I got 3 days to think about it. She's like, well, let's just try it, see how it goes. So I can tell you my first year of coaching sucked, man. I hated it. I was depressed. Wasn't very good. I wanted to be the person in there, and it did. It took a real mindset shift to really think about why am I doing this? What is it? I can't play anymore. You almost have to get this thing I'm not going to play in the big league. I'm not going to make a career of this. It's over. It's done. And just had to get closure, right? And it's kind of it's like one of those things when you get to the championship and you watch the other team celebrate right in front of you. It's really important to see that because it's over. Yeah. It sucks, but it's over,
Dude, I did it, man. We played in three NFC championship games with the Eagles. And the first one I walked off, the last two I watched the other team celebrate and I watched their deal. That should have been us. And fucking stinks like nothing else.
Yeah. I can tell you we just had to do it this year. We watched, as consultant with the Dimebacks. And I can even tell you as a consultant, although I'm not fully in it every day, my heart is in it, right? Because it's baseball guy. And it's to watch the Rangers celebrate at Chase Field in Arizona right in front of you when you go on this great playoff run, you're trying to win a world championship. It's yeah, man, it's like a kick, right in the where. So point being is it is a mindset shift that you have to get to, and you need closure from one place to the next, right? It is it's I think in the world of psychology, it's called identity foreclosure, right? It's you got to close on the house. It's over with, right? We're done with that. And it is different for everyone. But one thing that you said that I really want to hone in on was talk about hey, I like to do things that challenge me. And that's the thing as athletes that I think sometimes we don't realize that we do every day is every day we get up to practice, every day we get up to work out, every day we get it, going to a game or whatever it is. It's we're walking into a challenge, right? We're going to challenge ourselves in the weight room. Can I lift a little more? Can I do a little more here? And the thing about why that's so important to challenge ourselves is because that's one of the necessary ingredients to experience flow, to experience a flow state, right? Just be fully present, right? And we know our best lives are found when we can spend the most time in a flow state. So think about that for a moment. It's when you leave as an athlete, the thing that you've done every day, whether consciously or subconsciously, is you've exposed yourself to a challenging, beyond your comfort zone environment, and you're all in. That's what life is about, man. That's flow, right? And so when you leave that thing that you love so much that challenged you every day, and you go into sitting down, sending emails or whatever you're trying to do, it's that's the part of you that's missing. You're where is that at? And so what I found, and you found this in things that you've built and other things like that. But so let's just talk about flow
and competing and stuff. We had Stephen Kotler on the podcast and the flow state and all that. That's the addiction. Yeah. You have to find things that are the intensity has to get ramped up high enough to force you into it. And when, you're used to 100,000 people screaming in these kind of moments, I don't know, going and doing small mundane tasks don't fill.
Yeah. It just doesn't. Right. And I think that's when you talk about doesn't fill, it's hey, let's just start. And that kind of goes to the foreclosure piece. Well, let's stop trying to fill that cup. That cup is gone. Let's put that cup away. Let's throw it away, right? We're trying to look for a new cup. And I think that goes back to establishing Like, what did you love about sport? Like, what did you love about competing every day? What did you love about moving a man from point A to point B against his will? What did you love about the violence? Like what did you love about all those things? And then start to extract like what you really loved about it. And then let's just start to unpack some things like, well, what does life have to offer outside of professional sports that kind of has some of those elements, right? You know, that you really love deep down. And kind of, and Steven's going to know more about, you know, flow state than mine. Like I try to keep it as simple as possible in my little brain here, but it's just like, I think about three things, right? And you know, research supports this too, but it's like you need a clear, specific goal when we're talking about flow state. It's got to be a clear, specific goal. It has to be beyond your comfort zone. Talk about that challenging piece, and then you got to be able to see kind of some progress that's being made along the way, right? Which I think that's why people probably find a flow state when they're climbing the side of a cliff or a rock, right? You know, it's like clear, specific goal, get to the top. You know, like definitely beyond your comfort zone, and you're making progress along the way, right? So when I think about that, though, it's like that's why it's tough to sometimes find a flow state in business, right? It's like sometimes there's not always a clear, specific goal. Sometimes it is extremely mundane. It's like, oh, another email that I'm just going to copy and paste and send over here, right? It is hard. Am I really making progress in this sales cycle? I don't know, you know, like all those types of things. And so that's why it's so difficult to move from the arena, which provides a really clear, specific goal that's always beyond your comfort zone, right? And you can see the progress, whether that's a scoreboard, whether we just scored, whether, you know, we're battling back and forth. But it's also, I think it also speaks to a little bit the key, and I think one of the arts to life is to find the thing just beyond your comfort zone. And this is like why life is so gray and it's an art and not a science, is because if it's too far outside your comfort zone, well, you either select out or now you're stressed out, you're anxious, right? You know, it's like, what am I even doing here? You know, and so there's the sweet spot. And for me, that's the art of life, is like finding that sweet spot of like just challenging enough that demands your full attention and you're kind of enjoying what you're doing. You know where you're trying to get to and you can see the progress you're making. And so helping athletes find that, whatever that is, right? And that goes to back like trying to figure out what the heck did you love about your sport that there's other walks of life that can offer some of that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that anything will ever replace, if really you get to that level, to be able to do it. And I always think for baseball, like I was joking about, like the guy's ability to waste time. I don't know where you do that in any other place other than a baseball deal. Like, the game's not till 6. I'm going to get there over there at like 9 a.m. and just fuck around all day. Like there's really no job that's going to pay you the money to be able to have that little like screwing around. But, you know, and I know most of the guys, it's a reason they love to get into coaching, because it's a very similar lifestyle. It's an easy transition. Hey, I can't play anymore. I can mentor and bring on younger players and help them. Yeah. You know, for me, they always ask me, did you want to coach? And I was like, nah, not really. I would have been more interested in actually working in the front office and talent evaluation and kind of doing that. And in hindsight, you know, seeing what John Lynch has done with the San Francisco 49ers, and, you know, I know John played against him, and seeing like how he got into that front office, I looked at that and I thought, man, that would have been really exciting to do, to be on not only like coaching team acquisition, player acquisition, coaching acquisition, this talent piece, being able to put this whole thing together, assemble, and then, you know, managing, you know, having somebody manage the cap and figure out, like, I think that is the most fascinating part. I secretly hope somebody I know buys a team and hires me to do it. But I should have put myself out there to do that. And the way you do it is, hey, can I be an intern? Yeah. Can I work in the office? Like if you look at like the evolution, kind of climbing the rungs, ladders of like all of these professional sports, it all starts with like an unpaid internship. Yeah, I came in and swept the floor. You know, you know, I cut film for, you know, 20 hours a day for 6 months until finally they gave me a job sweeping the floor. And now 10 years later, here I am, the general manager. I mean, it's always a work your way up. And I think where most people fail is they have to humble themselves to enter that first stage. Like, hey, I was a professional football player. I did this. Now here I am as an unpaid intern and I'm sweeping the floors. And like that ability to humble yourself, I mean, that's the age old, you know, Bruce Lee, empty your cup. You know, you were a star on this side. You want to be a star on this side. You better empty your cup and learn this. Yeah. And finding, you know, a mentor. And that's something I've come to understand over, you know, the last 40 plus years of my life. And I talked about this the other day when I was on that call. You know, there's two, at least I view for men, there's two impactful times in their life. One, when you father children, and not that you have to. You know, I tell people all the time, like, if you don't want to get married, don't get married. If you don't want to have kids, don't have kids. They are by far the most selfish beings on the planet. And as a parent, if you want to be a good parent, you cannot be selfish. So if you're a selfish person, it's all about you. Like, just don't bring kids into the world, because it's not going to help them. It's not going to help you. And you're going to feel bad for being a bad parent. And like, sure. I have friends that are like, I'm extremely selfish. I want to travel. I want all my money to myself. I don't want to do this. And I'm like, dude, then don't have kids. Don't feel like you have to. But I do feel that as a having kids, and I feel like those two pieces of having children, and then also the day that your father passes away. I lost my dad a couple of years ago. Mm. I view those two things, and some people that were raised by their mom, my mom's still alive. I'm sure I'll add that one to it. But like, no longer can you pick up the phone to get that fatherly advice or that sage advice, because that's what fathers do. My kids are convinced that the role of the father is to give life lessons and be grumpy. They're like, it's all you do. You're grumpy and you give us life lessons. And I'm like, well, it's because I'm constantly doing stuff and I'm always busy. And they're like, all you do is you're grumpy and you try to teach us things. I'm like, well, that's all really dads do. That's all my dad was. He was grumpy and told me things. But like, those two things are impactful. And I think for professional athletes, like, you have to figure out what's impactful. Like, one, did you do the job that you're proud of? That's another really interesting piece that since I've been out, I've met a lot of guys who played but didn't really play, showed up, had a training camp, what I call having a cup of coffee in the league, and, went to a few training camps, never made an active roster, didn't do it, but they still looked the part and they still kind of played. And there's some pictures of them kind of playing. And I meet these guys and like, oh yeah, I played. And then you kind of, dig in, hey, where'd you play? This, and you can hear it real quick. Then they figure out like, oh shit, this dude was a 10-year starter, like, yeah. It's kind of a different thing. And I sometimes wonder if they showed up and they didn't get to do the job that they wanted. So but they're associated with it where people will forever ask them. I mean, you're 6'5", 265, 270 pound dude rolling around. People are like, did you ever play football?
Right.
You're like, I did. I played college and played a little bit in the NFL, and, that's all they have to say. And instantly, but like, they're telling something that like is true, but it's not like, yeah, I had played for a decade and, won a Super Bowl with Tom Brady and, like go through, now I'm at the Hall of Fame. There's very few people that get that story, but like, that's the story that everybody wants. Like, nobody wanted to be average. Nobody wanted to get hurt in year 2 and not have it. And so I run into people that had a chance at it, but didn't necessarily have the, let me get this better. Hold on. Okay. I wasn't talking to the mic. Didn't have the experience that they wanted. So then coming to peace with, okay, I did this. It wasn't what I wanted. That's okay, because I'm going to succeed in something else. For me, I was successful in what I did. So I just had to like retool the same kind of framework to apply it in different places. So, that piece I think is important, but then also like, who are you? Who am I without this? And how do I identify myself? And more importantly, when people meet me, they want to put us into boxes. So what's the box that I'm in now? I'm a big dude, so they're going to think I played football, but I don't play football anymore. So what's my next one? They think I'm a dummy. Probably for a long time I had a slight, maybe I did, maybe I didn't, but, having gone to Berkeley, I was a rhetoric major, all these things where, people meet you and they think, oh, this guy's going to be a lug. And you're like, no, I've got multiple, I got a degree from Berkeley in this, and, do your best to try to have them take you out of that box. But for a lot of guys, they don't do it. They just get stuck in these boxes, and then people just kind of push them away. But, that idea is like, as a guy retires, making peace with who you are, and then more importantly, being excited about who you are, and then putting a plan together to become that person, and then realizing that, much like football, you're going to fail, you're going to be great. I mean, not everybody's going to have success in everything. Like the wealthy older guy I talked to who's telling me, he's like, I've lost fortunes and I've made fortunes. And he's like, as learning the fortune or losing the fortunes allowed me to make the final fortune, which now he's, uber rich. But he's like, all of those were like, I thought everything was down, and then this led me to this. And he goes, without all those, I wouldn't have the framework to be successful like I am today. And I was like, shit, that sucks. You had to lose a whole bunch. But, at which point were you successful? He's like, it was in my 40s and my 50s. I lost a lot in my 30s and 40s, and then I hit big in my 50s. I'm like, shit, that's wild. Wow. Yeah. But it just means, he's like, as long as you stay in the game and you're constantly moving, you do good business, and you don't fuck people over, he's like, you're always going to have a way to pivot and people willing to help you. Now, if you burn every bridge and you're a real piece of shit, then people are going to come out with knives and try to kill you. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
Be honest, be forthright,
Yeah.
like all the things that your mom told you when you were 6 years old, like don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat, be a good person, be a good friend if you want to have a friend. All of those things that every kid should learn at 6, all of a sudden you're 46 become very real, where you're like, man, like this is important stuff. And more importantly, I need to know who I am and go forth in the world and put my best foot forward.
Yeah. No, I mean, as you're talking about like the cup of coffee guys, right? It's like that was me, right? I was the cup of coffee baseball player. Was like, yeah, I wanted to play forever. Mentioned the 5 surgeries, the season-ending injuries, and then went to a couple major league camps. Never made the active roster. So it's like, yeah, I got the pictures, I got the stuff, and it was coming to peace with like, okay, the thing that I wanted since as long as I can remember is not gonna happen. It's not. It's over, right? And it's like that's a tough thing to do, to think about. Like, man, I chased this, call it probably 20-year goal, right? It was the thing that was in front of me for 20 years, and it's like not going to happen, and it ends quick. We know this, right? In sports,
Yeah.
The season ends quick. Like it's every day, and then that's it. We're done, and career's the same, right? It's like you put all this energy and effort, and in one day, done. And then the industry moves on, right? And there's a game next week, and everybody keeps going, and you're like, shoot, right? And it's just you, and everybody else keeps going. And so it's definitely it is definitely a time where you got to get real with yourself, right? It's just, there's no other way around it, right? And that's why I encourage people all the time. It's like, you got to go talk to somebody about it, right? Because it's like it's easier to tackle something out in front of me. If I can like speak it, say it, and I start to look at it and I go, you know what? All right, I see what I'm kind of saying. Then I can kind of go get it and do something with it versus just spin in my head all day long, And so that transition to me, and that's one thing that I hope we all get better at in general, right? Where it's just like helping professional athletes transition out of sport, because I think the skill set, the work ethic, the leadership capability, the ability to work in high pressure environments with different background people that were raised different than me, that look different than me, that have, but we all can come together for a given amount of time and give all of ourself to something bigger than ourself, right? It's like, how else do you train that outside of sport? You don't, right? And that's why I love sports so much. Like if I had a really important job, I would make every kid play sport. Just like we make every kid play math or go to math and go to English. Like every kid must play sports. Every kid, right? Because you learn teamwork, you learn communication, you learn how to fail, you learn how to succeed, you learn all those things. You learn how to work with people different than you. You learn how to be vulnerable in the arena, right? You learn how to like put all of yourself into something and people cheer, boo. I mean, you learn all those things. And that's why I think for me, like coaching, and that's why I've gotten into coaching so much, where it's like, I'm so passionate about youth coaches, college coaches specifically, where it's like, you are getting someone at their most vulnerable time, right? It's like there is an emotional component to learning, right? The best teachers attach some sort of emotion to it. Well, is there anything more emotional than sport? I don't think so. And so it's like when you're bearing your soul on a field in front of a lot of people that you've spent years or weeks, whatever it is, training to win this game, I don't think there's anything more emotional than that. And then so take that emotional loss or win, and now the coach comes in and has something to say to you about that. That's going to hang in your brain for a while, right? It's like, I can't tell you how many things I've unpacked with athletes along the way. It's like, well, this coach told me once, right? This coach said, it's like, shoot, man, you're letting that narrative run over and over. And it's like, well, yeah, because he wasn't wrong. And, and it's like, yeah, but it wasn't helpful either, right? And so then we start to unpack, is it true? Is it kind? Is it helpful? You start asking questions around that. But that's why, to me, like when I think about coaching, it's like, your talk, coach, like your spoken word is probably going to become your athlete's self-talk. So you better be real careful and choose your words very carefully, because what you're about to tell them after this practice or game is going to start spinning in their head, right? And so and then essentially that's going to become their self-talk, which, as we talked earlier, like you think about, our thoughts become emotions, emotions influence actions. Well, that narrative long enough, that self-talk starts to go the other way too. It starts to shape my perspective, ultimately becomes my identity, right? Because that train works both ways. And so that's why, for me, when I think about transitioning out of sport, just the role of like coaching and being an excellent communicator, building trust, which I don't know how the NFL specifically is. I know how baseball is. It's like, I think we're getting better at training coaches in this, but I used to joke where it's just like, You know what it takes to be a professional coach? Two things. Did you play and do I know you? If you got those two things, come on. Let me give you the keys to this franchise. Blows me away.
Oh man, how do I say this? Not sound like a complete fucking asshole, but I've seen coaches who have big time jobs that are not necessarily good coaches, and you watch the quality of what you're doing, and they don't really have is there a pedigree associated with it? Like, did you need to play the game to know it? I don't always think that the God, who was it? It was I can't remember who the hitter was. It was it was something like one of fuck, I can't. Well, you'll probably know the story, but one of the greatest hitters in baseball. When he retired, they brought him on as a hitting coach. And as he was kind of coaching the guys in the, in the box during, BP, he's going through and he's like, hey, at the minute that the ball leaves the pitcher's hands, you should be able to call out and read the pitch. And so they're kind of look over, and he gets the guy to throw him, and he's like, curve, right? And he's basically calling the pitch as soon as it leaves the hand. And these guys are looking at him, and they were like, he starts getting mad at them, like, hey, fucking call the pitch. And they're like, how the fuck are you calling the pitch? He's like, I can see the rotation and I can read the laces the minute it leaves its hand. And they all looked at him and what? He's like, yeah, I can see the ball and I can read the pitch based on the rotation as soon as it leaves the hands, and I know where to swing. And he's like, why, you guys can't? And they were like, no, what the fuck are you talking about? And there was a guy that wasn't a great coach because his skill set was so unique. Yeah. That how are you going to that's insanity. I can't remember, it was Ted Williams or some amazing hitter in baseball. Yeah. But that's part of the reason when you get into this coaching thing, and I sometimes wonder if ex-players that did it at a high level, the fucking one of my favorites is Deion Sanders up there talking about toughness and this whole thing, because Deion was not tough. I played against him. I dove over the pile to take a fucking cheap shot at him and knocked him out, and got up and he told me, I ain't trying to touch nobody. I ain't trying to tackle nobody out here. My job is to lock motherfuckers down, and how dare you touch me? So to hear him get up and fucking motherfuck all these kids in Colorado and talk about all his toughness, Deion was not fucking bringing the fucking hat. He wasn't showing up to knock motherfuckers out. It's like, Ray Lewis, all of his highlights, you look against tight ends or running backs. He loved to hit those guys. Anytime he got a big lineman on him, he wasn't happy about it. So, there's a lot of guys that wanted, that have gone back in what I call historical revisionists. Not to say Ray's not a great player. He was a lot of fun to play against. But, I think some of these dudes have gone back a little historical revision, which, allows them to kind of build the myth of themselves a little bit. And Deion's done great. He's an incredible marketer. I don't know how great a coach he is. Fuck there for what it felt like about 2 or 3 months ago. He was ready to, get a head job in the NFL and fucking unseat Andy Reid is the best to ever do it. The media fucking jumped on him and then they just tanked. And he's working with these kids and this and, the NIL, it looks like a fucking disaster from where I sit.
Yeah.
But there is, and then even in the NFL, there's a really interesting kind of for a long time, for a guy to get a job, he had to be in his 50s, 60s, having literally climbed the fucking tree from sweeping the floor, assistant in here. And after 20 years as a coordinator, finally you get a job. Bill Belichick, who's, been there 26 years. And now all of a sudden they bring in, what's his name to the Rams? Sean McVay. Yeah. Right, he comes in at 32, and now all of a sudden everybody wants these young coaches, and the guy down in Miami and here, and you look at the guy, at the Niners and Green Bay. They basically just X'd out this old coaching tree and brought in a lot of young dudes who had big ideas and realized that this is the game. This is a different game than what these guys were talking about. But then there's Andy Reid, the old walrus, is still in there beating them all.
Yeah.
And, here's the only coach in history to take 2 teams to 100 wins and 6 AFC championship games. And, he did the same thing in Philly. So it's fascinating. But what I'm trying to get to in this long fucking drawn out piece is ex-players are not always the best coaches because their skill set is such that it's not replicatable.
Yeah.
So that's something I had a conversation about with a guy with this morning, is that for something to work, it has to be repeatable and replicatable. If for example, if I have a power athlete franchise of gyms and mine's the only successful one, and I hand you the recipe to do it, and you can't replicate what I've done, and you can't make it repeatable. You can't like mimic the effects. Like, the one thing we do is we do a lot of training programs, and we work with a ton of athletes. The one thing that's been universal over the 10 plus years we've been doing this is that everybody that does the program, regardless if you're in the Arctic Circle down to New Zealand, and I know because I taught hundreds of seminars around the globe and met all these fucking people, had the exact same results as they did in Southern California and Texas and Bodo, Norway, and this, that, if you lift heavy weights with consistency and move like an athlete through space and jump and throw and do all the things that we knew within the framework of the program, become a badass motherfucker. And I traveled and met all these people, and people showed up, and I was like, oh my God, this guy's like, what have you been doing? Exactly what you told me to. And those coaches used it to give kids college scholarships and win gold medals and go to the NFL and professional sports. What was the big hitter? The white gorilla down in Houston. The dude with the big hands used to hit with no gloves.
In Houston?
Yeah, for the Astros.
Oh, McCann. No. The catcher?
No, he was
Gaddis.
Hitter.
Evan Gaddis.
Yeah.
Gaddis.
Yeah. Gaddis was sweeping up, started following my training and went back and fucking just crushed the ball. And he's like, dude, if I hadn't have found you, I wouldn't have made it back to the major league, or I wouldn't be in the majors.
That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, like, I have years of these stories, and, and I didn't even know this until he hit me on Twitter and was like, dude, if I hadn't have found you, I wouldn't have played in, somebody was asking me, he's like, I wouldn't have won, any of the things that I had in Major League Baseball if I hadn't heard the name John Wellborn and come on and Power Athlete and all that.
That's cool, man.
So, I mean, and found us organically. He's like, I was working as a janitor, found it. Next thing you know, like, I started training and fall, so like those stories like run rampant all over. But I always wonder sometimes if professional athletes, because they have this like inherent desire to win and skill set, aren't always great coaches. But what I think they can do is mentor. And that's kind of where I've and like working with like the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kids, wasn't the fact that I was going to teach them jits. I mean, the strength conditioning piece is easy. I hate to say this, but I cracked that code years ago. Like, I can make people big and strong and fast and dynamic, and like that's a fucking recipe. I can go bake that cake anywhere, anytime, and with results that are anything short of phenomenal. And but what these kids really needed, they're from Brazil. They needed a solid, like, male figure in their life who was a mentor that could talk to them about being a professional and not a hobbyist, what it means to be the best, and how to get out of your own way and not be, fearful of success. The fear of success should drive you, not cripple you, and, not to fail, and consistency in this, and being as consistent as they are, and like monitoring everything from like teaching them how to eat, what supplements they need to do, what are the little things they have to take care of that make them a professional. Because for a lot of people, they don't know, as in professional sports, like, there was always kind of, when you go to a baseball team, there's always like kind of dudes around where you didn't necessarily know what they did, but they were real good clubhouse guys. They were guys you would go talk to in this, and like that, I think that is so valuable. In the NFL, we had guys that do it. We used to call them the brother coordinator. Where they were just like making like they were the dude you went to, and you didn't necessarily know what they did, but they were there because they had a positive influence on people. And I view really that as like my contribution to these guys, because my jiu-jitsu isn't good. I can get them big and strong, but really just being that solid figure where it's like anything, like, hey, I got a sore throat. What should I do? We should go to the fucking emergency room. Like, hey, like, this is happening, or, hey, I'm late into this. I'm like, hey, dude, I know you think this is Brazilian time, but in America, it starts at 2:00. You have to fucking be here. Now, what are you going to do for the punishment? You're 5 minutes late. You owe me fucking 50 push-ups, that type of like, we can be cool, but like at the end of the day, like, there's a job to be done. Show up and be a professional, put that hat on. We're not fucking around. And so I think for professional sports, the sooner you learn that, the better. And whether it's, you learned it growing up and you're just switched on kid, you learned it from, watching Rocky movies, or there's, an older vet in the locker room who talks to you about being a professional, doing a job each day that you're proud of, that when you leave and you go walk, you put your stamp on. There were guys when I was a young guy that talked about that. And, and then all of a sudden I came in and started as a rookie. And then my second year, I went in and started 16 games. And then I remember in that third year, my coach was like, hey, young guys, come out early. And I was walking out. He's like, what are you doing? I told young guys. I'm like, well, I mean, there were fourth and fifth guys walking out there. He's like, you're not a young guy. I'm like, yeah, but I'm in my third year. He's like, yeah, dude, you just started 16 games and one of the top guys at your job. You're not a young guy. And it was weird. I wasn't a young guy. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, it's really kind of an interesting piece, but really, like, that's what's been a lot of fun for me, working with these guys. And that's why we do special cases where, you know, a player like, hey, if this guy's in his contract year and he needs to come in, I got a lot of horsepower for you. And I'm going to teach you all the things you need to say. Like, a couple of years ago, I got invited to Dave Spitz, who's one of my great friends. He works with a lot of college kids getting ready for the combine. So he asked me to come in and talk to him. And I was like, if you listen, I'll give you the cheat code on how to beat all these meetings. I'll tell you exactly what to say, what to do. And every one of those kids, a few of them didn't get drafted, but every one of them went on and been a starter.
Wow.
And it's because that, you know, like, it helps to have somebody, one, who's done it, but also been reflective enough through 750 podcasts to reflect on all this fucking shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and I've had so many of these conversations. I've written so much, I've read so much that I actually have the ability to articulate it, which is kind of like for you. I mean, to write the book and have to do all these things and work with all these different places. I mean, you're working with, you know, private sector and baseball, and you're able to kind of cross mingle all these things and realize I'm going to look for the threads that connect. And these are the universal ones that I'm going to teach instead of just making it specific to business.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you hit on so many great points, man. Just a lot of stuff. But the last thing you said there is like the importance of being able to articulate something, right? It's like I'm learning this right now. I know it already, but it's like real right now, right? And you can't transfer what you can't articulate, plain and simple,
yeah.
Right? And so I say that, and that I'm experiencing this right now because my son is 16 and I'm trying to teach him how to drive. I got to learn, right, how to transfer what I know as a driver. Just because I drive a car doesn't make me a great teacher of someone else how to drive a car. And I learned real quick. I suck at it, right? And I'm like, oh shoot, I got to get locked in and like, hey, these are things to look out for. These are, you know, I got to stay calm. All the things that, you know, for anyone that's taught anybody how to drive, you get this principle, right? And so does it help that I've driven a car? Absolutely, right? Because I know some of the things, right? And I don't know how well I would be able to articulate it in a way like, hey, here's something that you're probably going to experience. Be ready for this, right? Look out for other people coming this way, whatever it may be. But I know driving the car, having enough experiences myself has really helped me be able to do that better, right? But doesn't make me good at it because I sucked at it early on. I think I'm getting better at it. I will say this, just a shout out to myself, is that my son prefers to ride with me versus my wife. So I'm just going to throw that out there. But anyway, yeah. So, but it is the importance of like, you've reflected a lot on it, right? And a lot of times, and that's why, like when I first went into coaching, literally it was, 2 days had passed and that's why I was depressed. I was terrible. Like I was a terrible coach, and I know I got better over the years, but it required me to reflect and really put down that old identity and get into like, how can I articulate what I learned along the way? How can I continue to study and learn? How can I connect with this person in a different way? And what I've learned along the way, and you mentioned mentoring and how important that is. I mean, behavior change, think about behavior change kind of comes from two places, especially for adults, right? Behavior change comes from two places. You learn enough, you want to, or you hurt enough, you have to. Right. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And that's why it's so valuable to have a mentor, have those guys in the clubhouse, in the locker room that are those mentors. And then, but it speaks to the humility of the younger players about going, hey, let's learn enough that you want to change versus hurt enough that you have to change. Because in the world of professional sports, if you hurt enough, you have to, you're probably going to be on another team or out of the league. Right. And so it's like, it's those guys that come in, with that, whatever you want to call it, growth mindset, humility, whatever, but are willing to take the mentorship from the guys that have been there before. And I think the best organizations do that. They recognize like, hey, this guy might not have a huge impact first and 10, second and 13, whatever it may be. But like, man, Monday through Saturday, this guy's pouring into people, or people are seeking him out because they're relatable. They have a way to articulate something in a way that maybe our coaches can't do, and so just the value of having mentors that have been there before, right? And then it's knowing yourself too. I saw a Michael Jordan interview just about a couple months ago. He was like smoking a cigar with some other old guy smoking a cigar. I'd never seen this interview before. And the old fella asked him, said, hey, are you going to, or have you ever thought about being a coach? And he said, no. He said, I'd hate to be a coach because I would hold people to the standard that I held myself. And that ain't fair. He's like, because I knew I was different. I held myself to a standard nobody else was willing to do. And that would make me a bad coach. And so I thought, man, what awareness is that? Because how many former athletes go right into coaching and they just coach the way they played, or they coach the way they coached, and they don't really do the hard work, the reflection of like what works, what doesn't work. How would I explain this? How can I connect with this individual player, whatever it may be? And so anyway, when I saw the interview, I thought, man, that makes so much sense. You like know yourself, right? Know yourself.
Dude. So whenever people use the word GOAT, and I'm going to say this on the podcast, it'll be funny because people will fucking try to rip on me about it. But every time I hear the word GOAT, I cringe. Like every ounce of me cringes because, LL Cool J invented it, the rapper.
I didn't know that.
Right. He referred to himself. Yeah. The greatest of all time. He referred to himself as like the GOAT, right? And then there's really only two people in the conversation, right? There's Jordan, who's probably the greatest of all time. And the only person in that conversation is Tom Brady, in my opinion. I mean, Tom had 3 Hall of Fame careers in the case of one.
Wow.
And on top of it is such a nice dude. I played at the Patriots for a short time. I knew Tom socially. And, if I saw him today on the street, like, John's great, like such a good dude. And so it was funny to see how much people rooted against him and how much people hated him. Not because he was a jerk. I mean, he's married to a supermodel. He's not married now. He probably, who knows, they'll probably get back together. But, had 3 Hall of Fame careers, good looking dude. I mean, played, this Super Bowls. I mean, he is like people rooting against him just for the fact that he had so much success. Jordan really, was not only was so good, but was so prickly. And really the only mark on him was the year he had to go play baseball. I mean, who knows? Right. He got suspended probably for gambling and they're like, go play baseball for a year. And he went and fucking played and crushed it. Yeah. I mean, yeah. And then goes back and crushes basketball. So, that's my deal with like the GOAT and everything. And, I love Jordan's mindset and he's so unapologetic.
Right.
And, they asked him the other day and they were like, hey, if, what was it? Like the 86 Bulls had to play against this team. Like, how do you think you guys would do? He's like, we probably win by like maybe 2 or 3 points. And they're like, oh, really like 2 or 3 points. He's like, yeah, we're all in our 50s and 60s. Yeah. And he was fucking dead serious. Like if he called his boys up, he knew that they could go take these guys. Yeah. And, and then you always hear people be like, oh, do you think he could still? And every one of those dudes is like, Jordan would average 50 points. You watch, Steph Curry shoot those shots. You don't think Jordan, the minute he saw Steph Curry do that, would just be like, I'm going to shoot all these shots too? He probably hit him with the same deal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Jordan, what I appreciate. And, Tom is much more diplomatic, but he's been interviewed, but like unapologetic. Like I was the best to ever do it. And I know it. I don't need to rub it in everybody's faces and remind everybody. Cause when you're the best, you ain't got to tell anybody.
It's true.
But
that's very
it's
true.
Fucking good.
Yeah.
I mean, I was part of the reason my 10th year I went to the Patriots, ended up getting hurt and not getting to play there like I wanted. And that was the year he tore his ACL too. I was going there specific because I wanted an opportunity to try to win a Super Bowl and play with Tom Brady. And that was like my entire thing. I was, I got hit up by the Ravens and some of the other teams. And I just was like, no, I'm going to wait on something that's really good. And if they hadn't have called me or if nothing popped up, I probably would have just retired at that 9th year. And I mean, it's fascinating to kind of step away. The term fan is interesting for me. Like the fanatic is where it comes from. So I'm not necessarily a fan of teams. I'm like a fan of humanity. Like I'm a fan of sport. I'm a fan of athletic achievement. I want to watch the greatest players stand on the biggest stage and compete at the highest stakes. And I want to see some person hold their hand up as like having done better than anybody else. Like I want to see that. And it doesn't matter what uniform they are. Like if, people are like, oh, are you rooting for the Kansas City Chiefs? And I was like, yeah, I mean, I played for the Chiefs. I want to see, like Mahomes has the ability to rewrite the game. I mean, he is so good. I'm so jealous that I didn't get to play with that guy. Travis Kelce is riding on that, which, is hard because Tony Gonzalez was a much better player, but just didn't have a Mahomes. And if he had a Mahomes and Super Bowl rings, it wouldn't even be a conversation. So, I mean, like, I understand the intrinsic value of this, and I'm honest because I know. And, people are like, oh, do you root for these guys? Even no, I'm like, no, I just want to see the best game. And the Baltimore Ravens are an unstoppable team. Their defense, everything about them is so good. And I'm so excited. I'm more excited to watch this AFC Championship game than I am to watch the Super Bowl because I think that the game is going to be in the AFC Championship game. It's going to be a heavyweight fight. And I just want to see, greatness happen. And I want to, it was amazing to be playing on the field with greatness. And I'm sad that I don't get to be on that field to play because I would love to play in that game. But to see it happen, I mean, that's the fun piece. And, but then what's so fascinating to me, and I'm sure you've seen this in baseball, where people are such intrinsic fans that they're so wrapped up in this fandom. Whereas as a player and as an athlete, you just want to see people go out and have amazing performances. I don't give a shit what they're wearing.
Right.
And, that's whenever, and I think you take that a step further, whether it be in business or anything that you do. And I try to remind these guys, like, you might not like somebody or whatever, but at the end of the day, you can never discount their achievement, or more importantly, like their ability and desire to win. And if you can even harness that in the face, like that's what you should be a fan of. You should want to go against the best in the world. Let's use the jiu-jitsu guys. Hope for the biggest fight. Who's the best guy in the world? Want to go against him. And if you lose, then you know what? Hopefully you got to go train and get back and get another one and another one, another one. It's the guy that retires first or gets off the mat or doesn't walk back in that effectively becomes the loser.
Yeah.
The guy that's able to be consistent over time. And Shanji Habero, my coach, competed for over 20 years, and they call him the Michael Jordan of jiu-jitsu, which is kind of interesting to even have that laid on you.
Sure.
But that consistency of training and of mindset and wanting to have these great performances in this, like I think if players could take that, or even if like the general public could kind of look at that and kind of marriage that a little bit more, whereas it's not about fans, it's not about this, it's success, it's about having incredible performances and executing great things, whether or not people see it or not, but then having the pride to do those types of things.
Man, that's it's really well said, man. It is. I want to ask you about, you mentioned this earlier about a lot of people that train with your program, train with you. You tell people, you got to tell people no sometimes, right? I mean, you take some on, you said, so that like what I hear is that you got to tell people no. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about was like, I mean, you got world champions, you talked about Gaddis, say, hey, I wouldn't have been back in the big leagues, wouldn't have won a world championship if I wouldn't have went through your program. So I want to ask two things. One is, how do you tell people no? Right. And you obviously have something to point them to, but because I struggle with that, so I'm curious how someone comes, I want to get better. And then the second piece is when you hear that someone, had a ton of success because of your program, how does that make you feel, right? Is it as fulfilling to help someone else accomplish their goals and dreams as it was when you accomplished your own?
I have never been as proud in my life as I was when, Victor Hugo, the BJJ guy, came to me. His back was pretty damaged, L4, L5. I was having issues. It was one of those things where his coach came to me and said, hey, and it was wild that like Shanji was his coach. We went out and got a coffee, and he posted an Instagram reel story and was like, hey, I'm having a coffee with this ex-NFL guy. And I guess one of his buddies hit him up and was like, yeah, that dude played in the NFL, but that's not necessarily what people know him for. Like his company, Power Athlete, like they do badass things with athletes. So he came back to me and he's like, hey, so-and-so, this guy who's a good friend of ours, somebody I trust told us. And I was like, oh yeah, that's what we do. And he's like, could you help me? And that's been like, that's where I fall. Like I have this, like, for those who have the ability to invoke change, there is a responsibility to invoke change. Mm. And so when he said to me, hey, I got this kid, he's got the chance to be the best. He has this injury and we can't get on the other side of it. We've taken places in this, and if we can't fix this, like, that's it. I was like, bring him in. Let's see what he got. And he's nice kid, good kids. Then I call them kids because they're in their 20s. They could be my kids easily. Hard work, respectful, like all the things that you would want for for people to say about your own children. And when I saw what he was dealing with, and more importantly, what he had been able to accomplish in the face of this, I was like, so he developed an entire style of jiu-jitsu where he didn't have to load his back. He could play on the bottom in this, and he's a big guy, and that's a little guy's game. And I was like, so this dude developed his unique style of jiu-jitsu because his back was so bad he couldn't stand on his feet. And they were like, yeah. I'm like, shit, let me see what he can do. And put him into the system. And I was like, you know what? Like, this is something that excites me. Like, let's take a challenge. Like, you're in your contract year. Nobody thinks you can do it. Like, come to me. And those things were important. And so they're kind of case by case, and people hit me up constantly. We write all the, a bunch of training for the guys at development group, for the Naval Special Warfare guys. That's another interesting piece. I love working with Naval Special Warfare and with SEALs. Those guys have been great for us and some of my best friends in the world, and just an incredible community because they use the training in a really meaningful way, and it involves the survival. do they get to come home or not? Like, that's where I view the deal. Gaddis hitting me up and telling me that. And I'm like, I'm so stoked that you were able to use it and be successful, fucking smashing the ball and ripping the cover off of it and just being a thug with the bat. Like, that's all I want to see. I just want to see that people used it in interesting ways and absolutely fucking decimated it. So I worked with Victor, and he went down to Brazil and he won the Brazilian Nationals, won double gold in the ultra and the heavyweight, or in his ultra and the absolute. Came back, and then we went out to Long Beach for the Worlds, for the IBJJF Worlds. And he goes out there and wins the ultra and the absolute, like first time in history that somebody had won both the Brazilian Nationals and the Worlds. They're about a month apart, and basically made history. And I've never been as proud as I was watching him go out and compete at that level, and not even noticing his back, being able to do things that he wasn't able to, and like seeing that kind of piece, dude. It was as close as the satisfaction I got from playing the game, seeing this kid be able to fight in the face of adversity when people are like, oh, you'll never be able to do it, fixing him, which we have the skills to do very easily. And allowing him to just go out and be a part of like that greatness and just stand there and like I don't even know if anybody ever I think one guy took a picture, just because I'm not like the type of dude to like run over and want to get a million pictures. Like, it's his moment. Sure. Like, I don't know. Like, everybody ran out for pictures, and I was like, dude, like the hay's in the barn, the work's been done. We know what was done. Like, I don't need a picture for this moment. Yeah. And like that type of stuff, or like and then the older guy I'm working with, he's like, I need to put on 10 pounds of muscle, and he hunted me down, and I'm happy to work with him just because it's an interesting case and it was a favor to a friend, but has become another really interesting people. So I think it's kind of case by case. And, we have a ton of online training programs, and we have a lot of resources. And if somebody really needs something, I have coaches and people. Like, my time is very finite, and it has to be something unique for me, where I'm like, you know what, this is something outside of my skill set, or this is something where, like, you know what, like, I can, like, there's other people that can do okay, but at the end of the day, like, I know I can do this, and and you just have to give your time wisely, because it does take away from other things. Like, I was joking with my buddy Matt this morning, we trained at 6, he's like 3:30 hits, and like, I got to pick my daughter up from school, I got my wife picks up my other kids up at school, I got basketball, I got jiu-jitsu. I mean, like, all of these things that I have to do that, like, I got from 5 a.m. to about 3:45, 3:50, and at 4 o'clock, like, I turn into a pumpkin. And it's like, because, you got kids in this. Yeah. And, you have to get a lot done. You have to be willing to, do a lot of stuff. So you have to be very cognizant of your time. And, because here's the deal, dude, people will waste your time if you give it to them. But I constantly remember people, like, my time is very valuable, very expensive. And like, the way you repay me is by fucking working hard. And then there's also an interesting thing with entitlement, where now if people are paying you, now they're entitled to waste your time. And so for like these guys, I even said to them, like, I don't want any money. I'm going to do this for free, but I'll just tell you what my hourly rate is. And I want you to never devalue this or never do anything. And they were like, we're in. And they show up and down the sword every day. I ask them never even said, hey, why are we doing this? And you get athletes like, oh, I don't know why we're doing this. Yeah. Those kids show up, and which wall do you want me to run through? And I was like, I'll take blind loyalty and blind admiration and desire and all those any day over that other stuff. And so that's what I look for. I look for desire. I look for focus. I look for people that fucking want this and want to be the best version of themselves. And if that's the case, I got you. If there's any deviation, I'm not your guy. And I'll just tell them that head up. I'm like, there's other people out there in the world for you that are probably a better fit. I'm not going to be the guy, because I'm not going to accept anything less than great. Yeah,
man, that's good stuff, man. That day, the one that hit me was, people will waste your time if you let them. And I think that's in coaching in an organization. I think that's the struggle, because it's like, there are dudes there that are, will run through the wall, will do whatever it takes, and then there's the others, however you want to describe it, and working in mental performance. A lot of times the coach is like, you get the others, and it's like, but that's why, I always lean towards like, let's be proactive in this thing, and you just got to fold it within everything we do, but yeah, that's the thing where it's like, there's the part of me where it's like, I think we're having this conversation because you do want better. That's why we're having the conversation. And I have hope for you, but sometimes my hope turns into frustration for months on end because I'm like, this person's not willing to do the thing, and it's like,
Yeah.
and at what point, and then I struggle with, right. And this is just the story I tell myself, is like, I struggle with the, like, how do I say no and this person know I still care about them, right? Because it's like, if I have one quote unquote strategy, it's just like, love the person you're working with. Like, that's the strategy. Like for me, it's like, just love them, like I don't have this business strategy or anything, and so I feel like, and again, this is me talking myself through it, where it's like, man, if I cut this person off, I feel bad,
I'm going to give you an analogy that
Please.
might make sense and maybe doesn't. Do you remember in Titanic when Rose is on the door?
Yeah. Near, far.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And like, there was more than enough room for fucking Leo on that thing.
Yeah. I think we all can agree.
There's a big door.
Yeah. I think we all
we can all agree.
Yeah.
And, he went to get on, he's this, and she just like let him go. Right. The love of her life went down. So I was like, all right, so the waters are cold. You're on the door. Like, not everybody's going to get on the door. You still love the person as they drift to the bottom of the North Sea.
It's a good picture.
But I tell people, I'm like, Rose didn't love him any less. She held his flame, kept the diamond, the whole thing at the very end. Like, it didn't mean that the, 70 years leading up to that moment was any more rich. She just had to let him go.
Yeah.
And I think for that stuff, if you don't, they would have pulled, she would have flipped, and she would have died too, and wouldn't have lived her life. At her age, did she make the decision? Hey, should I have died in that moment? Like, what is? And the joke is always like, he could have fit on that fucking door. Right. But when he went up, it kind of this, and he knew if he continued to do it, I would have tried to get up on the door much more agilely. But it's a pretty interesting piece for what you're telling me. And the minute you said it, I was like, oh man, Rose in the door. And like, you saw him go down. She's like, I love you, Jack. Like, I'm sorry. And then she went on and lived her life.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of people, they're, and there's I'm sure working with people too, like, you invest all this time, they're not producing, and then all of a sudden you feel the frustration, and then all of a sudden they turn it on you that it's your fault that you haven't done. And you're like, at the end of the day, I'm not swinging the bat for you.
Right.
I'm not, I'm doing this. What I'm trying to do is allow you to be the best version of yourself, and that's like, we're at the house and you're putting on a tux and I'm making sure that your tie is good, and I'm your dad dressing you before you go to the prom and pushing, now you're going to drive your date. Once you get to the prom, it's upon you to dance with your date and to be a good guy.
Yeah.
I made sure your boutonniere's straight and your body, this, I made sure you had the tie and the gas in the car. I gave you everything, but you have to go drive and pick up your date and take her out and have a good time. I can't have a good time for you.
Yeah.
But I'll be sitting here waiting for when you come home and you have the most amazing night of your life. And then we get to relive it together. And that's what I'm here for. Like, that's where I always tell these guys, I'm like, I'll walk you up into the mat, but at the end of the day, I don't get to cross that.
Yeah.
You go out there and that we're all standing there and that your team is there and that we're your fucking boys and we've been there every moment. But it's upon you to stand up there on that stage and do what you need to do. Now, win, lose, or draw, you're going to come off and we're still going to get the same hug. We're going to go figure this shit out. Be a lot more fun if they go over and hand you a gold medal and a bunch of flowers.
Sure.
But it doesn't change how we feel about you. But like, don't be afraid to be great. Don't be afraid to have your best performance. And I think all too often, especially in the pro sports, when things aren't going well, people start looking for reasons.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's because of this and this. When at the end of the day, nobody gets to do it for you. You have to do it. I can give you all the coaching and tips and this and film and everything. But at the end of the day, I got to stand up there, put my hand in the dirt and try to fucking fuck a dude up.
Yep.
And if I don't have the skills or I haven't done the work or I don't have the desire and the want and the intrinsic, like, I can't give you that. And you can be as mad as you want, but if I could, I would will it to you, but I can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and I think for like athletes or people that come in, that's something that has just been very interesting where it's like, for, the consulting thing's fairly easy. If a guy's hurt or he's kind of like, hey, I can't get over this injury or this, I have a million different resources. Like, hey, see this guy if you can't, like, I have a good Rolodex to help people. But if it comes into this thing of like, a little bit more deeper, that's when you just have to be really, valuable with your time or find people that are really trusted to be able to take that load.
Yeah.
Because invariably you're going to be the bottleneck, just like I'm the bottleneck. So having people around me that are, able to take this off that I can kind of like oversee a little bit. I think that's where the big piece is, and we do so much stuff online, Discords, coaches. I mean, we try to really manage the experience, but at the end of the day, I'm like Rose on the door. I can't get everybody on my door.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you can't swim, now here's another thing. Jack just fucking went down. I wouldn't have done that. I would have found another door. I would have kept swimming and been like, if this girl's not letting me on the door, I'm going to find another one. I'm just not going to freeze in this water holding your hand.
Sure.
So, that's, so just funny and Titanic analogies, which are always funny to whip out on people. They're like, Titanic, really? You're going to make those analogies?
I love it. No, I love it. And I appreciate you sharing that. I really do. Because that is one thing I'm trying to get better at, is build my network. So I can find people to say, hey, I trust this person. This is gonna be a great person for you. I don't have the time. But I always operate from the place for mental performance. At least I'm trying to work myself out of a job, right? I'm trying to teach skills enough that it's like, because when you're in the arena, you're in the batter's box, you got your hand in the dirt, whatever it is between you and you. And if I do my job well enough, my hope is like, hey man, I got this. I appreciate you getting me to this level. I'm going to go get to the next level with somebody else or whatever. Like, I'm okay with that. And to kind of bring it full circle, like as I was thinking about this, when you're sharing the example, with Rose and Jack and that's Titanic, but just thinking about in mental performance, I'm always trying to work myself out of a job. And I think good fathers do the same thing. Right. And I think you just mentioned, earlier when you talked about the two most formidable times in someone's life is when, or for a man's life is when they father children and when their father passes away. Right. And so when I think of myself as a parent, as a dad, man, my job is to launch. My job is to launch my two kids to be, purposeful, impactful, positive, people within their community, wherever they choose to go, ultimately where I'm not needed anymore, where, where they can go, hey, I remember dad telling me this. I remember this is the thing he was talking about that I rolled my eyes at. It's actually making sense now here, and so, so whether, working in mental performance or I think any coaching role, really mentor role, it's like, man, can I get you to a place where I'm not needed and you get to launch yourself? Because at the end of the day, it is just you and you in the arena. And so you can fully trust yourself in that moment. And I think great dads do the same thing, right? It's like they launch their kids into the world where they're like, man, I love having my dad's still alive to this day. I love having my dad there. But I also know I've been in some crazy situations that I've been able to get through them successfully, not always, right? But most of the time successfully because of the lessons that my dad had given me growing up.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I am forever humbled having kids. I got twin daughters who are 12 and then I got a little boy who's 7. The challenges and the trials and tribulations of raising daughters is very different than raising boys. I joke that raising boys is a lot like raising stray dogs. Just make sure there's enough food out and everybody's got some activity. Whereas I was on, like I said, I was on that call and one of the guys asked me, how do you balance male and female energy with raising girls? And I was like, if you figure it out, call me because they'll tell me I'll hear and I'll be like, there's a lot of there's a lot of pictures on the internet of me making dumb faces. You want me to show them all? I just that's part of the internet, right? Oh my God, so-and-so, posted this. And I'm like, I'm not the dude to come over and console you in that moment. I'm more like, your pony's going to be cold. Let me go to Home Depot and build you something.
Sure.
So I'm more like, hey, the house is on fire. Let's put it out. The sink is leaking, sitting down and trying to talk about, mental resilience as it relates within social media and this and growing up as my wife, who's an amazing person, got me a bunch of books this Christmas, and I've been reading. I just started getting into them about raising teenage daughters, and I'm reading this stuff, and I'm like, this is exactly opposite of how I was raised. But I was also a boy raised with 2 older brothers and a dad, and my mom just was like, I don't know, I just drove you to sports, made sure there was a lot of food, and if there was a fight, I broke it up. Other than that, and then made sure you guys had shoes. That was the extent of my mom's kind of impact. And as I'm reading this book, I'm like, and I just go back at my daughter being like, all you do is you're grumpy and you try to teach us things. And I was like, kind of like, what was it in Game of Thrones? The guy who was the hand of the king. He's like, I drink and I know things. That's what my job is. So that's become kind of a joke for them. And I'm like, well, if you don't want to be grumpy, tell me more funny stories and positive things. But everything I hear from you guys is constantly always is negatives. Talk to me about the wins. What good happened today? Don't tell it's so different. And my wife tells me, I'm not a religious person by any means, but I'm, you know, I'm spiritual and realize that there's something bigger than us. And she made a joke that like the universe gave you twin daughters to teach you a lesson. And I was like, yeah, but if I had 10 boys, we could at least have a badass football team. It'd be 5-on-5. Because my joke is one girl is equal to about 5 boys. So I was like, I'll just take 10 boys, 11, you know, we'll have one off the bench. But yeah, I mean, it's easy. Like, and what's also pretty fascinating is when you talk to guys who are successful, and especially if you talk to their fathers, and I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of guys who are successful as parents. One of the regrets that most of the dads say is like, I was too hard on my kids growing up, right? The dads I spoke to whose kids were not successful said the opposite. I should have been harder on my kids. I shouldn't have let them slide. I should have held the standard. When I talked to parents where their daughters were very successful, the one thing that the dad said was, you know, there was never a moment my daughter didn't know that I loved her and I wasn't supporting her. And I was like, wow, okay. So with your sons, be hard on them. With your daughters, make sure they love you. And I'm like, every day you got a car, you know, dad loves you.
I love that.
Like, let me, you know, and I tell my daughters all the time, like, you can lie to the priest, you can lie to everybody, like, don't lie to me. Because if you lie to me, we can't solve the problems. And more importantly, there might be a moment where you make that 911 call and I will come like a fucking fire truck on fire to come kick in doors for you.
Yeah.
And like, that's where they know, like, hey, it's getting cold upon him. Like, fucking, you want me to, I'll build something that should take 6 hours and 30 minutes. Like, just let me do it. So, yeah. And then when the guy asked me, he's like, oh, I'm like, dude, I don't have anything figured out when it comes to parenting. And anybody that tells you that they do is full of shit.
Yeah.
Now, you know, because you're trying to talk and you're trying to deal with, you know, maturing young people. And like you made a great point talking about coaches, especially for younger athletes. And I was just recounting all the shitty coaches I had that I look at now and be like, those dudes were either going through some shit or felt bad about themselves for the way they treated us. You know, I had a coach one time who I'm pretty sure was drunk. Showed up, he's a basketball coach. We were like maybe junior high, like kicked the ball at us and told us we were the worst players he'd ever fucking seen. And was like, I mean, like the worst shit. And I'm like, dude, I was like, I think back in the 80s, they should have been breathalyzing people before they came out and coach kids. Because I think these parents were like drinking, I mean, like just to be, or they were just assholes.
Yeah.
Like I like saying shit to kids that I would never fucking say. That somebody would snap with a phone now, record and go on the internet and they'd be like, you're getting jail time or you're leaving this town. Right. Like that was how they, I mean, that was just kind of, you know, like Little League baseball, parents fighting. You know, I was telling my kids when I was in high school, we used to get paid $20 to ump softball and Little League games. So like it was pretty close to our house. It hit us up, $20, go over there for a few hours and ump softball and baseball games. There were numerous times where I literally grabbed my money and fucking hightailed it out of there because I'm pretty sure one of those coaches was going to kick my ass and I'm like 14 years old. And I'm like, that's crazy. But
yeah,
I mean, it was a different time, but, you know, that piece of, you know, like you have to be able to provide enough information and enough direction that your kids leave and go off and be successful. But not so, and my mom tells me this, not so much kindness that they don't want to leave. Like, you know, I mean, mother birds push birds out of the nest when they won't leave and they push them and either they fly or they fall and die. And she's like, that's a pretty good analogy for all this stuff. I'm like, so were you driving us out? She's like, well, you guys never came back and you're all successful. And I'm like, fair enough.
Yeah.
But like, that's, yeah, I mean, the parenting thing is, mentoring young athletes to go out and be great feels very, doable. Parenting is much more malleable and more like by the minute, especially with daughters. So, I'm reading books and trying to improve upon that one, but I can't imagine in terms of like going into, I mean, athletes are like, it's easy to sell performance to athletes, right? Like you don't have to go and talk to a professional baseball player about performance. Like, right. Are you saying if I do this, I get better? It's an easy sell, right. But you work in the private sector. And that's the part I found most interesting. How do you sell performance to people that work a 9-to-5 job that necessarily can't micro see like, hey, I got a hit today and I didn't. Like how do they gauge performance? And more importantly, how do you sell performance in that way? That's what I find crazy.
Yeah, I can tell you, still learning that, right? To be honest with you, and that's probably like the thing I didn't quite expect, because in working with a founder and CEO, an entrepreneur that bootstrapped a business for, roughly 7 years, to get it to a multi-billion-dollar valuation. Like he's driven at a level that professional athletes are driven at, right? And the great ones, not just the professional, but the great ones, right? And so you go, oh, and so my, limited view of corporate is like, oh, they're all going to be like this guy, and then I met the COO and he was a lot like this guy. So the first two people I meet are like, they're after it. So I'm like, this is what it's going to be like. I jump in, I couldn't have been more wrong, right? It's like people are leaving like, I'm like, wait, what do you mean? What do you mean they left to another job? Like you can just do that like whenever you want. Cause in sports, like if I'm not playing, doesn't matter. They're gonna have to trade you or release you. I can't just be like, hey, I'm gonna go work over here. I'm gonna go work for the Titans right now. Like it doesn't work that way, And so, again, failure on my part to not realize like just how transient it can be. Right. And it's like, so I'm like, oh shoot. Okay. Not everyone's driven at the level of this person. That's unusual. Okay. But not all these people are just out here looking for the easiest job. It's like, hey, where can I do the least amount of work? And I jumped in right after COVID 2021, where it's like everyone wants to work from home. Right. And it's like, wait, what do you mean I have to be around people? I will never be around people again. So there's a lot of optionality out there where you could work. Right. So it's like, do I have to come to the office? Well, if you're going to make me come, I'm not going. So I'm going to go work over here. And so it was just a really unique time for me to really challenge what it meant to talk about performance. And I'm still trying to crack that, to be honest with you. I think one of the things that I spend a lot of time on is really helping people clarify the purpose. Cause I just think people leave college and they go get the job. It's like, why? Cause that's what you do. Like mom pushed me out of the nest or whatever. Like I got to go pay rent, so I just go get the job versus why are you doing this? What do you really want out of it? Like what parts of your day mean the most to you? And, we've even gotten to places where it's like some people, it's like, hey, let's color code your schedule. What are the green, yellow, and red things? Like those types of things where it's like, yellow being neutral, red being like, these things suck, and green being like, this fires me up. And then we get to those things where we're looking at it and it's like, if all you have is red all the time, I don't know if this place is for you, and that's okay. It doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you not, probably this industry or this place is not best for you. But what a lot of people start to realize is they go, oh, wow, like there's actually a lot in my job that I like. I think what I like is the interaction. It's funny, early on, people wanted to work from home and the thing they missed most was being with people. And I was like, do you not see the connection here? Like, you want the autonomy to not get in your car, but your biggest frustration is you don't feel connected. Like something's got to give. Right. And so, and the giving is not more virtual happy hours, right? I don't know if there's anything worse than that. And so,
dude, during COVID, people were like, yeah, we should get on a Zoom and have a drink. And my wife, was like doing it with her friends. Like all of her, girls she went to like elementary school, they were like going to have this like wine in or something. And they're like sitting around on Zoom. And I'm like, fuck, if this is our future, we should just fucking end it now. Like I'm sitting here having a glass of wine with somebody on Zoom. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is so bad. I mean, it's like this conversation, as good as it's been, I mean, it's fucking awesome, would be 1,000 times more rich in person.
100%. Yeah.
If like you were sitting here, like this thing would be, but what's amazing is we've somehow harnessed the ability to have impactful conversations by sharing on Zoom, because we've probably done enough Zooms to realize that, like, I mean, when we first started kind of doing, stuff on Zoom, and we were doing the video stuff, before we got on calls, it was all right. But then like, for the most part, people were just like sitting there and we were like trying to fight our way out. And I had a few other guys on the podcast with me. We just ended up having banter ourselves, hoping they would jump in.
Yeah.
Because people just weren't as skilled. Now here we are in 2024 and it's become a thing where you have to be somewhat animated and giving and like kind of get in this whole thing so that you're just not sitting here behind this 2-dimensional environment, hoping, glean things out. But shit, dude, that's almost 2 hours.
That's where we're at.
Yeah.
Dang, man.
I just glanced at the clock and I was like, it's almost noon.
Dang, man. We're rolling.
Shit. And on top of it, we didn't even do an intro. which is even more hilarious. We just started talking, but dude, if people want to know more, I mean, at least like we just dropped them in like on a 10,000 foot drop off. Like, but like if people want to like click on your social, the book, or like any of the other stuff, how do they find more on this?
Yeah, I mean, the book I still got in my head, right? That's the thing. I haven't settled on a title, so that's the thing. I'm still working through it.
Dude, are you? Oh yeah, shit!
So,
I was hoping that like I dropped it. I was like, man, I really hope there's a book or a manual or something on this, because I mean, coming. It's fascinating. I mean, dude, you just like I have a book outlined in pieces in this, and I need like time to sit down and bring somebody in. And people ask me all the time, and you're like, dude, like at some point you need to, because I have to throw that stake in the ground. But I hope you do.
Yeah, thanks.
And I'll
brother.
be one of the.
I appreciate that. I really do. But yeah, I mean, right now, like best place to find me is probably on, Instagram, which would be DMac_mindset. But I'm not even that reliable, to be honest with you there. It's like feels weird to me to be like putting myself out there, which I think, again, these are my own things I got to deal with, but trying to get better at that, doing that kind of stuff. And then myself and another mental performance coach, her name's Dr. Nicole Detling. We host a podcast called No Show Dogs, and where we interview people from sports, right, that have had experience, whether in the front office or as athletes, and talk to them about their mental performance frameworks and how they operate, and then how that works in business. So, you check out the No Show Dogs podcast. But those are the two places probably to find me, and I just got to get better at, to be honest with you, man. But I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. Yeah, dude. I mean, thanks for taking the time and allowing me to waste 2 hours of your time regaling you with, hopefully stories and, Titanic references. But thanks for tuning in to another episode of Power Athlete Radio. Hey there, Power Athlete Nation. Big shout out to all the heavy hitters who stuck around till the final whistle. If you've been soaking in the knowledge bombs and epic tales we've been dropping for free, here's your chance to be a game changer. Swing by kofi.com/powerathlete and toss a few bucks our way to keep the podcast fueled and firing on all cylinders. That's ko-fi.com/powerathlete. Your support makes a difference. See ya.